Welcome to the third and final installment of our media series on artificial intelligence. Having previously covered AI from the perspective of public market investors and company operators, today we're excited to unpack AI from the perspective of venture capitalists, those investors on the front lines funding AI innovation. John Vrionis is the co-founder and managing partner of Unusual Ventures, a firm he founded in 2018 after a decades-long experience at Lightspeed Venture Partners. Unusual focuses on seed and early-stage investing with a specific focus on enterprise software, infrastructure, and security. Makena was a day-one investor with Unusual, and we consider John to be a thought leader on all things technology, given his notable investments in companies like Arctic Wolf, AppDynamics, and MuleSoft. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me, Kia.
I think the first question that's on everyone's mind is whether we're experiencing an investment bubble in AI in the private markets. I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit on what you're seeing.
Not to be fancy, but my answer is yes and no.
Okay.
I think, a bubble is where there's a bunch of crummy companies that are getting funded that have no business model.
Mm-hmm.
I think in this case, like there are in most hype cycles, there's a bunch of really interesting transformative companies that are being built. Some of the funding rounds that are getting done are speculative at best. But I think long term, it's so transformative that, a bubble is something where maybe none of the companies are real. I think some of these companies are going to be iconic in the long run.
And do you see valuations in the early stage segment of the market also pricey? We know the late stage rounds like the OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world are raising at multi-billion-dollar valuations. How about in seed and early stage? Similar dynamic?
Similar dynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because the public market comps the multiples have compressed.
Sure.
And yet, a guy or two with an idea is getting at times a pretty frothy valuation with an unproven business model.
Yep.
So you really have to be thoughtful about where you pick your spots.
Yeah. Recognizing that valuations have started to expand, it seems like, unlike other technological waves, companies are scaling revenue more quickly, given the proficiency of these AI tools, that it enables companies to actually roll out products faster. Are you experiencing that?
Yeah, like with ChatGPT, most of these products are what we call bottoms up or product-led growth oriented, where the user can just get started, even swipe their credit card. So the rate of adoption is as fast as I've ever seen it. I think the big question on everyone's mind is we haven't seen a full cycle, a full 12 months. So do the products stick or do people switch to a new product that's come along since? We're calling this curious ARR. There's a lot of initiatives with Fortune 500 companies to try AI, and they're buying, but the question is, does the retention look like we want it to?
And then the follow-up question is how sticky it actually is, and what are the switching costs involved if a curious user decides to move from one model to another?
Yeah, and so this is where we spend a lot of time at Unusual, is really understanding what I would call the workflow.
Yeah.
So the stickiness, it depends. So in some use cases, there's hardly any stickiness at all. You could switch from one bot to the other if you're, you need a companion or you're writing a job spec. Where there's proprietary data or there's retention, the retention of that data leads to better outcomes as you engage with a model. That actually becomes quite sticky. So in things like customer support or legal, you're seeing a lot of stickiness. In some of the more social apps, I think there's a lot of questions about that.
Just because we're really focused on the early stage company formation and development, a huge part of your job is talent assessment and scouting human capital.
Yeah.
Where are you finding the best entrepreneurs in the AI landscape? Do they have any characteristics that are common, either where they've worked previously, their age, their education?
Yeah.
I don't want you to reveal any trade secret, but to the extent you can comment on how you're sourcing talent, that would be great.
Yeah, it's a great question. Early on in this AI wave, Google, DeepMind, Facebook or Meta, there were OpenAI, obviously. There were companies that had probably the most advanced thinkers or practitioners at a minimum in the wave. What's happened since, just in a short amount of time, is those people are linking up with people who either know a domain or are repeat founders, and they can use the AI technology for something they deeply understand. So really it's a combination of the researcher
I see.
and someone who's a domain or workflow expert. These are the, that combination is what we look for at Unusual.
And so you're finding a lot of co-founders that are launching companies. What is the the practitioner? Give a little bit more color on what that person generally looks like. So this is someone that's worked in customer service for 15 plus years,
right.
knows the pain points of the customer. They partner with a researcher and a product is launched. Is that generally how it goes?
Very close. I mean, if you take a company like Harness, which is my co-founder at Unusual, is the founder and CEO.
Yeah.
It's all about what do developers do every day and what could AI replace in terms of a lot of the manual toil.
Right.
So deeply understanding what engineers do as they build software and deploy it is core, but so is understanding what AI does really well. So you're seeing people who have a deep understanding of a particular job to be done, and they're linking up with these researchers who understand what the transformer models can do. It's the combination that I think is unbelievably powerful. I mean, you pray for these kinds of events, these transformation waves as a venture capitalist, and this is definitely the biggest one I've seen.
Yeah. Because you hit on programmers and computer scientists and coders, there's a debate as to whether AI will actually displace a lot of the needs for these types of professionals. There's a counter argument, which is actually it will just augment their capabilities more so than currently exist. Is it too early to tell? How do you envision that unfolding?
Yeah, I fall in the it's a bicycle for your brain, kind of thing where, there was a time when there were typewriters and then there were word processors.
Yeah.
And if you were still doing the work with the typewriter, and some people held on for a long time, you were just falling behind.
Right.
I view software development much like that. I think it will be an augmentation. The Iron Man suit, if you will, for the engineer is where I think this is going.
Yeah.
I think the idea that you would produce truly production quality software and be able to troubleshoot it at the level that people need without any humans in the loop, I would give you the autonomous driving as the analogy. Like level 3, level 4 is very doable.
Yeah.
Completely without a human in all use cases, that might be a while.
Yeah, yeah. John, before we get into the foundational models and the application layer, you've said a couple of times that this is a seismic moment in the kind of evolution of technology and investing in technology. How are you at Unusual thinking about capital deployment? Or is it fair to say that most of your capital deployed today is being geared towards AI-specific opportunities? How do you think about vintage year diversification and ensuring that you're thoughtfully allocating capital as opposed to one point in time? Just talk to us a little bit about how important AI is for you guys as an investment strategy today.
Yeah, so I guess at the highest level, it's viewed by us as one of the most exciting transformations, right, as I said. I think the devil's in the details, right? There's a lot of hype around this. And so our job is to figure out where should we be allocating capital. We want to play the odds. We're not one of these mega funds where we think of ourselves as an asset manager. We're a boutique, right? And so we're very slow and boring in the sense that we rifle shoot in specific areas.
Yeah.
So for example, we're not doing chips. We're not going to be the kind of fund that's investing in an NVIDIA competitor.
Yeah.
Similarly, we don't see a lot of long-term differentiation in the models themselves. So you've seen a lot of rounds where people are raising hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions, for foundation models. There was a time when people thought that would be where the value accretion would occur.
You guys don't see that.
We don't believe that. We actually think that will commoditize.
Yeah.
It's really around the workflow design themselves, the proprietary data sets, deeply understanding, again, the job to be done.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to see a lot of stickiness
Yeah.
and long-term business model differentiation. So we bet on two things, what we call picks and shovels. So maybe the developer tools or databases or cybersecurity things that enable the AI wave to happen. And then we selectively pick certain AI applications where people are essentially reimagining how that workflow can be done. And that's really the key. Founders tend to, the good ones at least, live in the future.
Yeah.
And they make assumptions from there. The not so good founders and often large companies, they live in the present and they optimize from where we are.
I see.
And so we're in the business of building big technology outcomes. And that's often done, or almost always actually, when founders live in the future and they reimagine how something could be done with AI.
Yeah, yeah. So, back to the foundational models, and you guys don't necessarily see value accruing to that segment of the AI value chain. Just because I know our investors will be curious, there was a pretty monumental development out of China with DeepSeek, revealing an open source model that was assembled on a fraction of the cost of what some of the US-based models have done. Just net, do you see that as a positive or a negative? I mean, from one perspective, you'd say, okay, China, technological development, geopolitical threat. Right. On the other hand, hey, they drove down the cost so substantially. It's also open source, which might prompt companies like OpenAI to move more in that direction. Any point of view on DeepSeek?
Yeah, I think net it is actually a positive.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I think that, regardless of your views on distillation, which is essentially using someone else's model to train your own, the reality is that the open source wave it's legitimate. There's a lot of companies, Facebook obviously is quite public about this with Llama, that are pushing the boundaries and open sourcing these models. So again, that's sort of a validation that the commoditization of the model itself in terms of what it's going to be able to do, people understand there's a finite amount of tokens or data that you can train the models with. Now there's arguments in academic circles about synthetic data as a way to improve, but there probably will be diminishing returns at some point on the model performance itself.
Yeah.
So
we might be getting there now, right?
Hard to say. Hard to say. Every 6 months the pendulum swings. Yeah. Because there's just some other breakthrough.
Right.
So we certainly haven't reached AGI yet.
Yes.
And maybe somebody does, and maybe they hold that back.
Yeah.
For 6 or 12 months as a way of monetizing it. I'd be curious how Sam Altman and that group thinks about this.
Yeah.
But I think generally speaking, the open source is going to be the wave that's going to dominate.
You do.
And so I do. And so I think the real thing you want to focus on is the workflow design. I don't think it's being talked enough about because that's really where you'll see value accretion and differentiation.
Yeah. So going back to the concept of the foundational models starting to plateau perhaps, is a workflow designer at the application layer, wouldn't an entrepreneur, don't you want some certainty with the capabilities of the foundational models themselves so you know what to build on? Or is it, my presumption is that landscape is evolving every 6 to 9 months. It's kind of difficult to build around that. Is that a fair assumption? Or
maybe another way to frame it is you want to ride that curve.
Yeah.
Regardless of rate of change,
I see.
You win.
Yeah.
And so by having the open source, the competition, and building it, your solution in what we would call a modular way, where you could plug in the latest reasoning model.
I see. Yeah.
And it only makes your solution better. What you want to focus on is really the proprietary data that can make the model. There's a base model, and then there's a derivative model that you might use for customers. It's going to be superior as a result of the data and that workflow experience that ultimately for the users, it's like, well, I got this job done. It was more performant, meaning more accurate. I did it in 10 times faster, 1,000 times faster.
Yeah.
And now it's cheap because these open source models, I'm not paying nearly. The inference costs are much less than if I say I pay OpenAI, who's got to figure out how to pay for the training of the model.
Right.
The thing that DeepSeek did was, well, it used someone else's model to train, and they did some really interesting hardware tricks, so they could use much older chips than the latest from NVIDIA. So that's why they were advertising, hey, our training costs were
substantially
lower.
Okay.
Yeah. But for every startup who's choosing between OpenAI and 10 others, if it's just as good in a fraction of the price, isn't that good for everybody?
Yeah.
So net, I think you see more consumption.
Yes.
Because the costs are so much lower.
I mean, you're painting a mosaic that the enterprise, the backdrop for investing in AI enterprise applications, it seems to be more conducive at this point. As you said, the foundational models are more sophisticated, the costs are starting to come down, and the use cases arguably are becoming more tangible. Is that fair? And what are you doing in your portfolio today that is very workflow and enterprise specific? Maybe you could give a couple of portfolio company examples to bring that to light.
Yeah, so the timing question I think is a really good one because for me, I teach at Stanford, right? I teach in the business school, so I'm always trying to remind my students of these historical transitions. And this reminds me of cloud computing.
It does.
Yes, because when AWS first came on the scene, it wasn't the easiest thing to use.
Yeah.
Like, you really had to be a pretty sophisticated engineer, or at least be willing to spend time. Imagine your wife or your partner says to you, "Hey, the dryer's broken." Like, you had to go take the whole dryer apart. Like, not the easiest thing, man, not for me at least.
Yeah.
Right? So engineers that were using cloud early on, like, they were pretty sophisticated, but eventually you had tools like Terraform and others where it became very easy for the average engineer to build something. That's exactly where we are with AI. Early on, you had to be almost a PhD level person to really understand what was going on. Just in a couple years since the GPT moment, you don't. Like, you can prototype something in a weekend that is really compelling. And for me, that's when the market expansion happens, because now it's accessible to all of these people.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
We have companies that do things like picks and shovels. We have for AI applications, you can't use traditional databases. So we found the leading database used for what's called vector math. It's based in Berlin, but it's by far the preferred tool that developers are using when they stand up these apps. They've made it so easy to use that quadrants spread like wildfire around the globe. From them, we started to see, okay, what other applications?
Who's using these databases?
Yeah, and what applications are showing like 1,000x improvement. So you take something like data privacy or data security. People are constantly signing up for regulations, GDPR, DORA. It's like, okay, well, I agree with my customers that I'm going to adhere to these, but am I actually? The beauty of this is you can use natural language processing. We have a company called Reliance. It looks at all the contracts that you've agreed to, and in real time is constantly monitoring who's had access to the data, where is it processed, where does it reside. So your security and privacy teams know exactly what's going on. So the workflow is, instead of manually trying to keep up with all of your permissions and data, by the time you do it, or at least have in the past, you're almost out of date.
Yeah.
This thing does it in real time with agents that are constantly monitoring it and alerting the human, hey, here's what's happening, here's a recommendation, you decide now what to do. So something like data security and privacy, it's a massive industry.
Yeah.
Similarly, we have a company called Resolve.
Yeah.
Does this for what we call site reliability engineers. These are the people who used to have a pager. Kia, they're the ones on call when your app is slow, people are complaining. Well, imagine if you have an AI agent that's just constantly monitoring for latency. Sends you an alert and says, hey, this happened as a result of this code change. Here's what you should do, roll it back or make this change. Do you want to move forward or not? Yes, okay. So you're engaging with this almost like a human. And it's giving you a constant visibility, a recommendation, and then it can actually execute actions. So when you look at that versus how humans do that today, for us, I don't really care which model's under the covers, as long as it does what's the user expects. But that workflow and those data integrations to all their systems, I think it's going to be the future.
Just out of curiosity, it seems like some of the deal flow emanated from that vector-based data company in Berlin. That's down your wheelhouse as an infrastructure investor. How did you source that one, out of curiosity?
Well, so again, we picked very specific. Think of them as like pieces of the technology stack where we think a differentiated approach, not a better approach, a totally different approach is going to be the unlock for the future. So in this case, the way that the models work is they literally predict the words that answer the question in the most satisfactory way. You don't want to scan all the rows and columns of all the data you have. You want to what's called vectorizing all those words into numerical values and quickly retrieve those. That's not an Oracle database. That's not a Mongo database. So vectors. So we're like, whoa, what are developers using? So you can look in the open source community.
I see.
Reddit, Discord, these kinds of places.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, this is where you learn about these things, and you get in those communities, and you ask a lot of questions, and this is what we kind of nerd out on all day to find these things.
That's fascinating. So my next question for you is assessing the competitive landscape, and more specifically, I'm curious how you see industry incumbents, large software providers today, think the ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workdays of the world, starting to compete with startups that are also rolling out tools that are geared towards AI. Do you think that this is sort of the classic, you teach this at Stanford, I guess, the classic innovator's dilemma, and whether the incumbents can actually incur a short-term or near-term hit to what's an amazingly attractive business model to innovate quickly enough to compete with the smaller, scrappier, starting from first principles business. How do you see that competitive landscape evolving, and who's poised to win in enterprise AI from your perspective?
Yeah, so I do work with the book Innovators
You
Dilemma.
do? Okay, all right. Yeah, I didn't know
class.
that. All right.
So the dilemma, not to be pedantic,
No, please.
is you either have to kill yourself,
Right,
or kill a startup
Yep.
that's killing you, usually by buying them.
Yep.
And that's a dilemma, right? And very few companies are willing to kill themselves.
Yeah.
But oftentimes that company that emerges as the one you need to kill gets very expensive very quickly. A bit like the Wiz deal that we just saw with Google.
Yep.
So there are few boards, few CEOs that are willing to have the fortitude to pay whatever price necessary to buy the company that eventually might be the killer. They often just exit those markets. Only later, i.e. Kodak, they realize, shoot, this is what killed us. So the book is one of the best, I think, academic books on business that Clayton Christensen is the author. I think that's exactly what's happening today, in the sense that a lot of the larger incumbents are certainly aware that AI is a real thing. The question will be how many of them bolt on AI to their existing solutions versus reimagining what the job to be done is.
Yeah.
And that's why venture is the place to bet this as an investor, because the founders they're the ones who reimagine how that job to be done will with AI in the future will be. The legacy companies, they take what's in the present and they use AI with their legacy code and their legacy customers, and they basically optimize. But they optimize on the present. They don't do what's called a discontinuous innovation and really jump into the future with something that the user, says, I couldn't even imagine that. I wanted a faster horse. I couldn't have imagined a car, from the Henry Ford. So I think the startups are using AI to reimagine how these jobs will be done. I think the legacy companies, they'll always be great for distribution and platforms, but they're very unlikely to be the innovators in the equation.
And so even though there's been so much value accretion in the public markets for the AI leaders, the Magnificent Seven, Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA, you see that as not truly as true innovation. It's a kind of point in time, and you really think more of the value accretion will happen in the early stage venture market. Is that?
If we're going to use the definition of innovation as truly.
I guess, could these companies become AI native at this point in their lives? That's the kind of the question.
I think that's exactly the point. I don't believe so. I think that the inertia that comes with being one of the big seven is so strong. I mean, if history is any indicator, they may buy things to try to bolt on, but the idea of disrupting their existing business, right? I mean, what is Google going to do with OpenAI, right? The whole search business is predicated on you engage in a certain way and people advertise organically and inorganically.
Yeah.
Is that really how we're going to do looking for information in the future?
Yeah.
I don't know. But if not, their whole business model is at risk.
Yeah.
And so they know this. But how quickly are they going to disrupt themselves? Or should they just buy OpenAI because that's the future?
Yeah.
You could imagine the discussions about that.
Yeah.
But that's happening with all the big platform companies.
Yeah.
As they sort of try to juggle earnings calls that are every 90 days with being relevant for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fair to say that we haven't necessarily seen those bolt-ons take place just yet.
Well, take ServiceNow. They just bought MoveWorks for almost $3 billion. That's an agent-based IT, essentially ticketing solution.
Yeah.
I think the revenue multiple was probably quite high. So somebody there could see that, gosh, tickets might not be the way of the future. Maybe people will engage with agents. Maybe I won't even submit a ticket.
Yeah.
Maybe within the product itself, I'll just ask questions.
Yeah.
Why would I go through that whole process in a world of AI? But that's unlikely to come from a large company. It's going to come from someone who reimagines the future of how people do support.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up, a couple more questions for you. But what do you think people are missing on AI today? Are there any blind spots or things that people just aren't attuned to?
I would say there's not enough talk about this idea of workflow design.
Yeah.
Like truly understanding how not just a better experience, but an entirely different one is likely to be the winner in AI. And as a result, I just don't think, I think those companies are still to be born. Or maybe they're just unknown right now. And I don't think people appreciate that quite as much. Like, as I said earlier, as we get to a place where anyone just about can prototype things and build with the tool, the Legos are there. The idea that you could reimagine the future and create something that, again, isn't better, it's really different. When I talk to my students, I say, Uber wasn't different, it wasn't better.
Yeah, it was different.
It was really a different experience, right? Calling a yellow cab, not knowing when they're going to show up or who was driving you or how much it would cost is an entirely different experience from a GPS on your phone and all the ratings. And I think that's the power of AI, is people will reimagine some of these things. But the workflow, the design of that workflow, given what the technology can do that's so unbelievably good, that's the power of it, and that's the potential. And I think realizing that's, whoever figures those things out, that's where a lot of the value will accrete over time. Those will be the companies that are the Magnificent Seven
20 years
in 20 years. And they probably don't even exist today.
So I mean, one of my takeaways is you still believe that we're very much in the infancy of this cycle, if you will.
100%. I mean, I used the commercial internet, right, when it was created in 93, 94, 95, right? Like, there were some early people who thought, oh, this is what it'll be used for. Only was it a few years later that we saw that social networks and professional jobs and these applications, they were not what people originally thought would be the big value drivers because of this technology inflection. It came years later. I think AI, we're just starting to scratch the surface of what it can be. But it'll be a few years before you really understand, like, oh, wow, these are the Ubers and Facebooks and LinkedIn's and Googles of the future. So that's why we're so excited about what we're investing in now.
Two final quick ones for you. Who in the AI space today do you feel like is operating best in class? Like a management team that either in the private or the public markets that you hold in an esteemed light?
Whoa. I mean, I only have a good vantage point for our portfolio companies in the sense that I see them embracing this idea of, hey, commoditization at the model level. It's really the workflow. So the companies like Reliance or Paxton's one we just did, where in the legal space.
Legal, right?
Yeah, the research that people are doing is it's really next level. And AI is an amazing tool for synthesizing public record, documents, records, and they really get this. They'll use whatever model comes on, ends up being the best. Arctic Wolf is the same. Arctic Wolf processes 1 trillion security events a week. And they don't care which model it is they use to do that, but imagine automating a lot of the work that the security analyst does. So I think it's redesigning your product, understanding the power of the tech. I'm sure there's other companies doing this too.
But Arctic Wolf's a good example because that was a long-standing cybersecurity company that was started many years before this AI inflection took off. But you're saying they managed to incorporate it into a lot of their workflow.
Yeah, because they realize that they have a proprietary data set. They have thousands of customers and all of the data and all of these security incidents. And imagine if you could train a model to do what humans have, at least 80–90% of what humans have done. Like it's transformative in this in the security industry.
My final one for you, and it ties back to Stanford, but human capital, as I said earlier, is a big piece of what you do as a venture capitalist. I'm curious if you're seeing, how you're seeing young talent in Silicon Valley today and where they're gravitating. Maybe 10 years ago it was very much geared towards consumer internet companies. 5 years ago it was more towards cloud data warehousing. Are you seeing more folks get interested in AI, maybe even using the business school as a case study? But how is human capital flowing to this this nascent technology?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I think every few years, at least at Stanford in the business school, the popular thing shifts.
Hedge
funds.
I remember.
Hedge funds were like at one point. One point is real estate.
I remember.
PE. There's certain classes that are super hot. Venture capital was very hot at one point. Less so these days. I do think it is around. Now, I think there aren't as many, at least MBAs, who believe they're ready to start an AI first company. They realize this is kind of the Wild West and there's a lot to learn. So the hot thing now is to go join some of these workflow companies or foundation model companies and just learn and be a part of it. And so the bet is, maybe unlike crypto a few years ago, because that was a hot thing, that AI is more sustainable, or there's a clearer business model there. And so that most of my students, at least, that they're asking, like, which AI company should I go work with? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Well, John, this was fantastic. Thanks so much for your partnership. Thanks for educating us with all of your insights. It's really cool to hear what you're seeing, as I said, on the front lines where the actual incubation is happening. And I think you painted a really positive narrative for what's to come. And I think AI has been cast in can be cast in a somewhat negative light, in the sense that it will displace a lot of what we're accustomed to, and perhaps displace people from their jobs. But what I'm hearing from you is a very optimistic narrative.
Yeah, I'm more of an optimist about humans evolving and adapting. And I think, just like with a calculator or the computer or cloud computing or the mobile phone, like, I think this is just another lever and moving us forward.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to adapt, and there'll be a whole nother Magnificent Seven here.
Yeah.
In the distant
I'll hold you
future.
to that 20 years from now.
Okay.
Thanks again.
All
really
right,
appreciate it.
Yeah.